My name is Andrea. I'm your moderator for this evening. I am with Inspira Advantage. With me, I have Aryaman and Katie, who will be introducing themselves momentarily. And they also make up a part of our Inspira Advantage team. So tonight's discussion, what are we talking about? What is our topic? We'll be speaking about how admissions officers review med school applications. We're really excited to be here tonight. I think we have a really awesome presentation and really awesome discussion lined up for you to really give you as much value and insider knowledge into what goes into med school applications in the process. So what are we speaking about? We'll be speaking about the application review process on its own, what makes applications stand out, addressing common weaknesses, expert insights, and then we always love to leave some time towards the end for a Q&A. So throughout the course of the webinar, we highly encourage you to leverage that chat, type in your questions, whether that be about the application process or maybe you have a question related to a personal narrative or letters of recs. We want to make sure that, we give you all the time that we can with our two awesome panelists here tonight. Just before I pass it on to them, just one quick note, this webinar is recorded, so you will receive a recording in your inbox within a couple of days. So want to make sure we do that. Just a little bit more about us, because I recognize the fact that there's a ton of really new faces in the crowd tonight. So whether you've been on our webinars before or this is your first time, welcome. We're extremely excited to be here. And as mentioned, we're Inspira Advantage. We're a globally recognized admissions consulting and test prep firm with over 16 years of experience. We specialize in helping students gain admission to top graduate healthcare programs such as medical, residency, dental, veterinary, PA, and nursing with a 94% acceptance rate. That is something we're extremely proud of, and that is actually quite higher than the national average as well. So we are extremely proud of that. We believe in starting early, which is why we offer something called pre-help advising for college freshmen. I don't know if we have any college freshmen in the crowd tonight, but this one is for you. So what does our team do with students? So we help build a tailored academic timeline, including course selection and GPA strategy, find impactful experiences like research, shadowing, clinical and non-clinical volunteering experiences, extracurricular leadership roles, et cetera, et cetera. And we help make their applications stand out from the rest with a stellar personal statement and interview prep. Now, what this does is it lays a strong foundation to differentiate applicants and make them leave a lasting impression. That is the goal. In addition, our tutors provide personalized one-on-one test prep for MCAT, DAT, and GRE. We offer diagnostic tests, custom study plans, and interim progress tracking, allowing students to see a score increase. On average, we have an increase of 15 points on the MCAT with our 45 plus hours of tutoring. And then for our 60-hour program, we actually even offer score guarantees. So for the MCAT, that is 515. When it's time to apply, our all-inclusive application programs offer unlimited support through the entire application cycle. So this includes crafting a personalized narrative and school list, perfecting personal statements and secondary essays with unlimited edits, providing interview prep, scholarship guidance, and waitlist strategy. Our point is that we're by the student side until they receive their acceptance. Our ultimate goal is very clear. It's very simple. It's to create the most competitive candidates and applications, ensuring our students shine in a competitive admissions landscape, right? It's getting more and more competitive each year, and we want to be there to get you into your dream school. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about us, we offer personalized consultations via video, phone, or email. So no matter where you are in the application process, we are here to support you. We're here to offer guidance. And I'd love to pass it over to our two wonderful panelists for tonight to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Katie. I am in my 4th of 6 years in plastic and reconstructive surgery residency at University of Wisconsin after medical school in Richmond, Virginia at VCU. I have quite a few years of educational and teaching background prior to medical school. And so this role fits really well for me. This is a hard process, and I just want to do whatever I can to help make it a little bit easier for folks. So I love these topics. We're happy to answer any questions, and thanks for having us.
Hey everybody, my name is Aryaman. You've already heard this field before, I apologize. But a little bit about me. I'm from the Midwest, from Indiana, but went to undergrad at Duke in North Carolina, where I studied biomedical engineering. didn't actually plan on becoming a physician, but realized working as an engineer was not it for me. Very fortunate to have been accepted to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, did med school there, and loved it so much I stayed back. So I'm currently an interventional radiology resident at Johns Hopkins. Been involved in tutoring, counseling, admissions for many years between Duke and Johns Hopkins. So I think between the two of us, we have many, many years of experience and wisdom that we'll hopefully be able to pass on with you today. And if not, in the future, if you need anybody to give you some more advice.
Oh, I can't advance. I don't think I have the slide sharing. Aryaman, do you have it? Can you advance?
I don't know.
Oh, here we go. Got it. Okay. Okay, great. Let's get started. So the application review process tonight, we're going to mostly be talking about how to optimize your application and what the review process looks like from our end as a reviewer. And kind of hopefully that insider information a little bit will give you some insight as to how to kind of best advertise yourself or best display yourself on your application. And so things that obviously go into your application, not just your primary, but also your secondary. Of course, we need to acknowledge whether it's, right or wrong or however you feel about it. We need to acknowledge that your MCAT and GPA are heavy objective measures in your application, and they're things that can hopefully be optimized from your perspective. Next, we'll go into depth about personal statements, details about what to do, what not to do for those. Letters of recommendation, we'll talk about kind of some strategies to optimize those. Those are strong points for your application. These are people that are advocating for you. We'll talk about how to optimize those and get the best letters you can. And then secondary applications, huge portion of your overall application and how we receive them as reviewers. Your secondary application allows you to further advertise yourself, further demonstrate specific fit to each individual program. So we'll talk about how to do well on those as well.
All right, beyond the numbers. MCAT and GPA, like Katie said, those are the numbers that we get. Like, we really don't get a whole lot else. And I think that's good and bad, right? Obviously, you're more than just those scores. There's a lot that goes into it, right? For some people, that it just wasn't the easiest process, in college and taking all those classes, and it was very rigorous, and that's okay, right? But can you make up for the rest of that in the other things, right? In the subjective part of your application and the extracurriculars you did. So acknowledging that numbers are important, they're not the end game. A lot of times they're kind of just a threshold. And this is where, when you do school selection, it's really important to be strategic and figure out where your numbers line up, right? If your numbers are very far away from that median MCAT and GPA, it's going to be really hard for you to move to the next step, to the interview process. So find the right school, recognize that it's a threshold. I promise you, a 522 versus a 523 on the MCAT is not going to make or break your admissions. It's going to be the rest of it. So they're important, but there's a lot more that goes into it.
So some key stages of the application review process and kind of what our end of it looks like. There's an initial screening that's done. This is what Aryaman was alluding to with the threshold. GPA, MCAT, and prerequisite coursework. These are just kind of check boxes or like a minimum threshold requirement that is looked at on your initial application that qualifies you for like further review. The further review is what's referred to here as the holistic review, which is then looking at your written portion. So the personal statements, your experiences, your most meaningful activities, the letters of recommendation, and those kind of give us some depth and context for your application as a whole and for hopefully getting to know you a little bit better.
Yeah. And then, there's a few couple other steps that go into it, right? And I think the benefit of the med school admissions process is there's always a human looking at your application. I mean, I don't know, 10 years might all be AI, who knows? But for now, there's a human, right, who appreciates the things you've gone through. And typically there's someone who've done the med school process, so they know what it's like. And they're going to look for things like in your secondaries. Can you clearly articulate why you want to go to that school? Does your personal mission align with that school's mission? Are there any red flags, right? There's a lot of things that can be like that, like, poorly written, full of typos type essays, or statements that you're making that are arguably a little concerning or problematic, right? So everything is read, top to bottom, I promise you. Every word is read. And then when it comes down to, do you, as a holistically, does your application match the type of student that they would want at their school? And do they want to extend an interview to you? And if they do, that's really a great time to shine, right? That's where you get to show yourself more than just who you're on a paper. Because for some people, writing isn't their strongest skill, and that interview is where they do their best. So there's a lot of different pieces that go into this at the end of the day. And if one part of it is not your strongest, it's okay. There are other parts where you can make up for it.
So some things that make applications stand out. The first is, and this, if you've been to our other webinars, this is a recurring theme. This is like something that we want to make sure that you all know that is such an important part of your application that sometimes is kind of put on the back burner, and that is the narrative, or kind of like the theme throughout your application. And so really when we say like the narrative through your application, a well-defined personal narrative, as it mentions on this slide, really is just that your application can be understood in a chronological way and usually has some thread that connects all of the pieces. That's easy for us as reviewers to kind of understand. So a lot of times that looks like a personal interest in some kind of maybe niche area within medicine. And so some examples of that: research and innovation. Maybe you're someone who's really interested in an MD, PhD track, and you have all of these different aspects of interest in this area in research and innovation. You have some biomedical background, biomedical engineering background. You have certainly strong research to support your claims that you're interested in this MD, PhD track, and ideas about where you would take that. And so you've got this kind of hopefully longitudinal narrative story about how you got here, why you decided on medicine, how you've been invested in medicine and say research and innovation, or whatever it is that you're passionate about, and kind of where you're going with that. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that your application should be totally one-sided, like all I do is research and that's all I'm interested in. I'm not suggesting that, but there should be some kind of common theme that can help us understand who you are and what your passions and interests are in the field. So that is, if you can conquer that, it's sometimes a hard thing because as medical pre-med students, you're trying to grab every opportunity that seems interesting or relevant. But really you want to try and narrow those down if possible into things that you're really passionate about, and that will come through as a narrative or a theme in your application. Those are really meaningful applications for us. Impactful clinical and research experiences, not just participation. Again, sometimes you're just grabbing what you can in terms of experiences, but if you can try and make those meaningful and impactful, that's not just doing them just to check the box, but rather maybe having a longitudinal role in these activities, or a role that shows growth and development. So let's say you started your time in research as like, say like a lower level kind of like, I took care of, for example, for my personal example, when I started in a research lab in undergrad, I was taking care of snails because that was what we had to do for the research that it was in the lab. And it was a kind of a tedious job. And I started out this like very low level, just mastering how to feed snails. And over the years, I was able to start participating in actual research projects, data analysis, statistical analysis, manuscript writing, all the way up to, developing and proposing and presenting research. So showing growth in a longitudinal way and an impactful way. So it wasn't just I showed up and I did these hours. It was I showed up, I did these hours, and here's how I progressed through that role and contributed to the lab or contributed to the clinical experience that I'm describing. Next, authentic letters of recommendation. This is so key, and I think I didn't appreciate this when I was applying, and I think many of the clients and students that we work with don't always fully appreciate how impactful letters of recommendation can be. So this is like these relationships. You want to develop relationships with these people that you're going to be asking, ideally because they are the only ones that can really express and brag about you and advertise you to us as reviewers. So this is like a free pass for you get a couple of people to say this person rocks. They're going to be so dedicated and thoughtful and compassionate and hardworking and resilient that you just get to brag about you. But they can only do that if they know you. And so that is why it's so important to develop these relationships with the people that are going to be writing your letters. That cannot be overstated. It is so important. And can really not make or break, but can really change the tide of your application. And then a personal statement that feels compelling and not generic. This is important. Lots of personal statements are just fine. They do all the things. I want to be a good doctor. Here are a couple of things that I've done and why they were meaningful to me, and they're fine. Some are really great. Some are authentic and personal and help us as reviewers understand who you are, where you came from, why this is absolutely the only path for you, and why you are going to be someone who is so clearly going to succeed. And that's not easy to do. I'm not suggesting that's a small feat, but that is what you're going for, or you're shooting for, at least with these personal statements, not just something that you think I want to read as a reviewer. You think I want to hear something as a reviewer, and so you put it in your personal statement, is going to be less impactful for me than getting to really understand you as an applicant.
All right. Continue to build on everything Katie said, because I think that is really the key part of this webinar is, right, the things you said and how to stand out, because that's what we look for on our end. Quality over quantity, as she said, it's about that growth and that track that you take. And I think she highlighted something really important. It's so easy to just kind of grab whatever thing you see in front of you. Like, it's so easy to join a million clubs in college, right? And you might think it's going to look great. Oh my God, like they're going to be overwhelmed by my number of experiences and the things that I've done. But it's honestly the other way. It's a little strange, right? I'd rather see 2 amazing, thoughtful journeys than 100 filler clubs that you joined. So talk about the things that you do care about, and passion does show up on the paper when you really are writing something about you care. And then show, don't tell. I think this is hard, and it's really easy when you're talking about your experiences. Like when you get to the AMCAS part of the experiences, right? You have a limited amount of words or characters that you can use. And you're probably going to do things that say, like, I was part of this club and we did X, Y, and Z. We helped these people, or helped this group of this community out in the community. And it's great that you did that. I'm really happy that you're telling me. Or it's like, you're going to tell me that, oh, you're really passionate about medicine. And again, great that you're telling me this, but I want you to show me why you're passionate about medicine, right? Was there a specific encounter that you had with somebody in the clinical field or the non-clinical field that altered your way of thinking, or why you wanted to do what pursue medicine? Describe that experience to me as best as you can, and then describe to me what you took away from it. Why is that meaningful to you, right? One thing I tell a lot of people is that I should not have to ask a follow-up question when I'm reading your application. If you've told me something, like you tell me I am passionate about medicine, and if I ask myself why, that should be the next sentence on the paper. You should have already addressed what I want to know. And if you don't, then it's going to make me feel like I'm just longing for more. And, books are great when they have cliffhangers. Med school applications are not great with cliffhangers, all right? So tell everything you need to tell. I know it's unlimited characters, though.
Awesome. So I want to do a quick check-in with our audience. I know we are giving you a lot of information. I want to see if there's any kind of questions in the chat. So far, I don't see any, but I do encourage you to get those questions in, whether you need us to elaborate on something or you had a follow-up question. We want to hear from you. Additionally, we want to let you know that for being here tonight, we are offering you a 10% off on any one of our wonderful programs with the code 10OFFWEB. And we also encourage you, if you have any sort of specific questions, or you're thinking about applying soon, you have, if you have questions, whether that be about, MCAT tutoring, or you need somebody to review your personal statement, or maybe you've gone through all of this and now you're at the interview stage and you're like, I don't know how to interview. We want to hear from you. And we have services, and we have a wonderful team who is ready and willing to sit with you and help you figure that all out. So we encourage you to take the opportunity and book that one-on-one. I don't see any kind of questions yet, so I will pass it back off to speak about the personal statement.
Perfect. Okay, this is something I love talking about. I am a huge proponent of working hard on a personal statement. This is something that I think, again, it's not, I don't like using the word make or break because I don't think any one thing is make or break, but this can really help your application if this is good. So things that make a good or a strong personal statement. So we talked about the narrative. This chunk of words is your time to explain to me that narrative. If I didn't get it in the rest of the application, which hopefully I did, but if I didn't get it in the rest of the application, this personal statement should tell me everything I need to know about who you are, where you're from, why that makes sense for this path, what you've done in this path. That shouldn't just be a retelling of your CV, but what you've done in this path that shows me the dedication to this field and your interest in this field, and allows me to understand why you are going to be a great medical student and physician. And so that narrative is important. That should be certainly carried through here, if not demonstrated more clearly and elaborated on in your personal statement. And then I've already touched on this, but authenticity matters so much here. So a lot of, if you've heard other webinars from me, I apologize, this will be repeated, but this is some advice that I got as a medical student applying for residency. And it was 90% of personal statements are just fine. They are just like the things that we expect to see. They're normal, but they're not really doing anything for me. And that's fine. And it doesn't hurt your application at all. It just maybe doesn't put you over the top. 5% are like red flags. They say some sketchy stuff, like something I don't like in there. I don't want to work as a part of a team. Some just stuff that's not going to work. But 5% are so authentic and genuine and clear and mature that it makes me as a reviewer want to interview you so I can meet you, because that's how interested I am after reading this personal statement. That's how well I think I understand you as an applicant. And you're not always going to get that. Honestly, sometimes I write them, or sometimes I try to write them, and it comes out just like pretty much okay, not bad. And that's okay. But what you're shooting for, at least, is this genuine, authentic narrative of who you are, how you got here, and why you're going to be such a great physician. And that shouldn't be, like I said, it shouldn't be a retelling of your application or your CV. It's really your time to kind of advertise yourself and explain yourself to us so that we can meet you kind of through this personal statement.
All right, common mistakes. This one isn't necessarily mentioned here, but I think the easiest one, and you'll hear us say this every time, is spell check, please, grammar check, whatever it means. There's so many different ways that you can make sure there's nothing spelling wise or word choice wrong in your application. There's no excuse to have typos or poor grammar in your application. So please, please, please don't do that. It like just jumps out on the page, and it's like hard to get past sometimes because of how frustrating it is for the reviewer. All right, overused phrases. And I think by this, it kind of comes down to fluff. You should be able to look at each sentence almost individually and say, is this a sentence only I could have written, or is only about my journey in my life? And if it's not, it's likely too general. And if you have too many of those, then those sentences that do matter get lost in the mix. So kind of cut down as many fluff sentences as you can, or if there are there, make them specific to you, a specific experience, a specific lesson, a specific part of your journey. Specificity helps here. Failing to showcase personal insights. And I think this really comes down to the AMCAS experiences section a lot. I think this is maybe my engineering mind or whatever it may be, but sometimes I like to break them down when you're writing the experiences, right? The most general format is like STAR, right? Situation, task, action, result, right? That's a great way to start. And then obviously you want to build on that. So what was the situation? What was happening? What is the single thing that you did, that task or that action? And then what was the result? And the result here is two-part. It's what was the result of the action in terms of like, I helped deliver 100 meal kits to the community, and it was amazing, right? But then The second part of the results is why that mattered to you in your journey to pursue medicine. What did you personally take away from that experience and how you're going to build on that? And if I don't see that, I always feel like I'm missing a part. And I want to see that insight that you gained by doing the thing that you did. Disjointed experiences, right? This all comes down to that narrative, that theme. Ideally, it'd be great, right? You know, you walk into college, you know what you want to do in medicine, and everything you do is related around that, right? I think one example, like we could talk about, is like, to put this in words, like say you want to do orthopedics, right? That's your goal. You learn that at some point in your college career. So talk about what inspired you to get into orthopedics, right? That should be in your personal statement, right? What medicine, what event transpired that you thought orthopedics right for me? And then you talk about, through your personal statement and your experiences, what are the things you did to build on that experience, right? Did you take a specific biomedical engineering class related to orthopedics? Did you find out, hunt out a researcher who does orthopedic research? Did you join a club that is involved in orthopedics, or whatever it may be, right? So then you mention those things in your personal statement and then in your experiences. And then you talk about like, why orthopedics? What do you want to do in the field of ortho, right? Do you want to, are you really interested in prosthetics, or is it orthopedic oncology, or is it, something else, right? Implants or whatever it may be. How are you going to make an impact in that part of medicine and in medicine in general? And that's the narrative we're talking about from start to finish. And then that's like the center line, and all of your application is built around the center line in different ways to reinforce it. And so then when we bring your application back to the table, it's like, hey, this person was amazing. They're clearly interested in ortho. Here's why. And I think they really align with our school's mission and goal and be a successful medical student. That's what you want us to say when we present your case to the admissions committee.
So what we're talking about, and we tend to do this when we're in these webinars, is talk about the ideal perfect application, right? And this is like, if I could go back in time, knowing what I know now, and cherry pick all these perfect things, this is what my application would look like. But that is just not real life. It's no one application is going to have all of the components that we're talking about to the degree that we'd all like them to have. So at some point, your application will have a weak spot. And if you think that it doesn't, you need to go back and look at it again, because there's always a weak spot in an application. You can't possibly have thousands of hours and all the things that we need to do, because it's just too much. And you're busy doing schools and schoolwork and working. And so we're balancing all of these things. There's going to be a weak spot. So how do we address those weak spots in our application? If it is a low or lower score in terms of MCAT or GPA is nice because you can show progression and growth. So even though your overall GPA may be less than ideal, we can, as reviewers, can certainly see, oh, my cat found out how to get into the room. Sorry. Through a closed door. It's pretty impressive. We as reviewers can see an upward trend in grades. And that is important. That shows us that you figured it out along the way. Not everyone has all of the things to make you an outstanding student right off the bat. But if you can figure it out, that is a skill that will be helpful in medical school. So that upward trend is helpful. If you have a less than ideal MCAT score on your first go round, depending on where you're at on that scale and what the rest of your application looks like, if you decide to retake that improvement, of course, you would ideally have a significant improvement in score, shows us that you can self-correct, you can troubleshoot and overcome obstacles. And that is meaningful. And yeah, it would be great to have the highest score possible on the first go round, but again, not realistic and not everybody's application. So showing that growth is helpful and impactful as a reviewer. Limited clinical exposure. If this has happened to you, it can sometimes, especially with COVID, well, you guys may not have had that, but sometimes that was still being impacted during your application collection kind of period. If that's the case, you're just going to want to try to strengthen that best you can with shadowing, volunteering, or even work opportunities. So really try and find clinical exposure is so important because it's important to us as reviewers that you know what you're getting yourself into, right? We want to we want to know confidently that you know all of the pros and cons associated with this field, and the path that it takes is not an easy one. And so clinical exposure is important for that reason. And so what you're going to try to do is decide for you. Sometimes people need extra time or like a gap year to do this, but really find a way, whether it be volunteering or through a paid opportunity like scribing, find a way to gain that clinical exposure. That will strengthen your application. And then weak letters of recommendation, this can ideally, so this is, like I said, can't be overstated how important these letters of recommendation are. Really what you want to do is try to develop relationships with the people you're asking from. So imagine that I have 2 applications in front of me, and one has science professors that say, Katie came to class on time and got good grades and was nice to everyone. And the other one says, I know Katie for the last 2 years because she's been volunteering with this program and took my courses and taught them to other students, and showed up early, stayed late, all of the things that we look for, TA'd the courses, whatever. It's not just one interaction, it's this ongoing relationship that you're trying to develop with these folks so that they can speak personally to you, personally about you to reviewers. And so those are the things you're going to try to do and optimize to kind of overcome some weaker areas. But the most important part of this is that you have to identify those weak areas before you can address them. So take a good hard look at your application.
All right. So what Aryaman looks for, honestly, I'm just going to steal what Katie looks for here because they're honestly a bit of the same. And the things that we care about are things that Katie's already mentioned, right? Can you take a good look at your journey in medicine and make sure that it was the right choice for you? This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. When you are committing yourself to this, it is 4 years of residency, 4 years of med school, 3 to 7 years of residency, plus minus fellowship, and then the rest of your career, right? You have to truly be devoted to patient care because of the frustrations that come along when you're in medicine. It can be very challenging and hard on people physically and mentally. So point is that you have enough exposure past just the rosy parts of medicine, that you've seen the negatives and know that this is still right for you and that you can articulate that it is the right choice for you. Like I said, actually care for patients, right? I think sometimes people choose medicine because of the practical and pragmatic nature of it, right? In a lot of senses, it's great. You have great job security, stable job, good income, right? But it's so much more than that. You can do that in a bunch of other fields. The thing that sets medicine apart is getting to care for people's health in a healthcare system that is very convoluted and challenging for people to navigate. So you are making a difference for a lot of people if you go down this path, and make sure that's what you want to do. And then longitudinal interest in a field, right? This is not something that you just kind of wake up one day and be like, hey, I think I want to do medicine, right? And I think I can speak to this really specifically because I didn't plan on doing medicine. I think it was always on the back burner for me for a lot of time. I mean, I did biomedical engineering. It's not like I didn't know what medicine was, but I didn't think that's what I wanted to do. And I worked for like about a year as an engineer doing work on knee implants and like laparoscopes. Like I truly did everything but I knew it wasn't right for me. But if I had this in the back burner, I could demonstrate a longitudinal interest growing, right? I thought about medicine, kind of thought a bit more, didn't like engineering, really thought about medicine, right? I ruled out the thing that everybody who read my application, if you read my application, you think this guy's going to be an engineer. But I was able to show them that that actually wasn't right for me and medicine was right for me. So do something similar. Show that you have thought about medicine in a deep introspective manner and that it is right for you.
Yeah, totally agree. Some other tips for strengthening your application. So again, we've talked a bit, I've mentioned this already a little bit, but look for opportunities that are not just, and Aryaman mentioned this too, look for opportunities that are not just like, I did them because they were there and I needed some clinical hours. Look for opportunities that actually align with something you're interested in the field or something like that you know you could learn from. And because not just will that make it more convincing on your application, but those hours will be more insightful and meaningful for you because you care about what you're doing. Easier to do and obtain those hours because you're not dragging your feet because it's just a checkbox. And C, of course, it does align with, contributes to this narrative and helps us understand you because this opportunity makes sense with the rest of your application. I can see why you would pick this opportunity because I see these other pieces in your application that show me that you're interested in this. So for all of those reasons, it's in your best interest to find actually meaningful and interesting clinical volunteering and research opportunities. Craft a personal statement that highlights your unique journey, not just your qualifications. And so again, this should not be a retelling of all the things that you've done. In fact, those are like my least favorite personal statements to read, is like all these things that you've accomplished, because that's in the rest of your application and I can see that and be proud of you there. But your personal statement should be your journey, and explain to me how you got here and why you're here and why you're going to continue in this field. One thing I forgot to mention is that this crafting your personal statement should take, in my opinion, months. So keep that in mind. Not everyone does it that way, and I'm sure people write plenty good personal statements in a week or two. For me, every good personal statement I've read or written has taken months. And that's because there are so many revisions that are needed, feedback from other folks whose opinions you trust and value. I had an English teacher once, a writing teacher once, that told me sometimes you need to kill your babies. And that has happened to me. And what he meant by that is you get this personal statement that you think is like, oh, I've nailed it. This is really the one. But every feedback you get is not doing what you want it to do. And sometimes you have to scrap it and start over. So this should take you, in my opinion, months. And honestly, the earlier you start thinking about it and bullet pointing and crafting and brainstorming, the better these come out. So just give it the respect that it's due. And then letters of recommendation. I think I've kind of harped on this enough already, but really trying to develop these relationships so that they can write kind of authentic letters to you and advocate for you as an applicant.
All right. Steps to strengthen your application. I think number one, Katie mentioned this earlier, but you can't know or address your weakness until you know it's a weakness. And ways to do that are to sometimes take a step back, right? You get so easy to just get caught up in everything that's happening. The MCAT, your classes, applications, primary, secondaries, whatever, right? And your application is like the only thing that you are seeing for hours on end. Sometimes if you have time, take a step back, get some fresh eyes, figure out what's missing. And then talk to other people to review your application holistically. Is there a glaring weakness that they can see? Like you don't have enough clinical exposure or research experience, or something about your personal statement is just off. Get that advice and feedback from people so you can address the weakness before it's too late. Meaningful experiences, I think we've talked about this, ad nauseum at this point. The quality is important, depth is important. Talk about what truly matters to you. Don't tell us what you think you want us to hear, right? Don't just join a club because you think that every med school person needs to be in this club, right? Join it because you wanted to. And if it's not, that's fine. Join a different club that you wanted to. And just talk about it. Passion does come out when it's genuine. And then lastly, our narrative for this talk is that you need to have a narrative, right? So make sure that it is there. It's in as many places as possible so that is what we're associating with you when we're talking about your application.
So as a kind of recap, I think we've harped on all the themes that we need to harp on, really, but your first impression matters always. And whether that be by your primary application, I would say your secondary application is somehow also a first impression. I would say your interview is somehow also a first impression. All of these stages of first impressions matter. Certainly your primary application is going to be your first attempt and showing and argument as to why you should be invited back for an interview. And so those impressions matter. Both from a scores perspective, but also from the writing portion perspective. The narrative weighs heavily. We love a narrative. It's, humans are programmed to find patterns. So as a reviewer, if I can easily find a pattern in your application, it's going to stick with me much easier than someone who has 1,000 different experiences that are all kind of disjointed and kind of all over the place. Even though I'm sure that's great for your experiences in learning, it's easier as anyone, as a human, to understand the story if there's a pattern and a thread that leads me through it. And then looking for potential. So things that we're always looking for, I'm actively trying to find places in your application that demonstrate resilience, maturity, interpersonal communication skills that you can't just blatantly say on paper. These aren't experiences that you can write down as like a checkbox. These are things that you kind of have to go through to earn. And they are what I would say is some of the most important characteristics in medicine. And they are what make a good physician. So these are things that I'm trying to always look for in an application. And these are things that you should try to find ways to demonstrate to me. And that is what I look for in an application and what's going to make your application stand out.
Awesome. So we have some questions in the chat, but before we go into the Q&A, we'd love your feedback on tonight's session. If you scan that QR code, it'll take you back to like a very quick survey. I promise you it's like 4 or 5 questions. We just want to hear about your experiences, right? If there's something we did exceptionally well, if there's an area improvement, or maybe there's a particular topic you want us to cover next time, please let us know. We are, we do this. We do these on a weekly basis. And if we can provide you with all the value that we can, and if we can really speak about topics that matter to you, that'll matter to us. So we encourage you to do that. With that being said, I'd love to hop right into the Q&A. So first question, how is the review process different for reapplicants? What are some things you would consider and look for as a reviewer? And I'll open this up to both of you.
I will take this one because I have a lot of experience with reapplicants. It's one of the main subset of students that I work with Inspira is reapplicants. And I think it is such a harrowing journey to have to go through this more than once, but it can be done successfully. To answer your question, the review process is different, in my opinion, for reapplicants. And the reason for that is because you've been through this once. Your application should be as optimized as it can be as a reapplicant. And so if that means taking time away to optimize your application, whether that be through necessary clinical experiences, research, whatever it may be, then that is what's required. What I really want to see in a reapplicant is that you've taken time to address weakness, strongly and significantly address weaknesses in your first application. So you should have a strong, mature answer for, what happened the first time. That's going to come up and it should be addressed in your application. And sometimes it's smart to put it in your personal statement, even like, I didn't get in the first time and here's what I've done to improve my application and further and better understand this field because I'm so invested in it. And so that's what I'm really trying to see on the reapplicant side of things. And it is doable. You can be successful from that perspective. I've helped lots of students. I have lots of friends that are physicians that were reapplicants. It's definitely doable, but you just need to demonstrate the optimization and the maturity portion change from first application to second. Aryaman, do you have anything else for that?
I mean, not a whole lot outside of really a couple quick things. I think you covered everything. One is, I agree. I think you're judged to a little bit of a different standard as a reapplicant, like Katie mentioned, because you have gone through it. 2 is, I think it's really tricky because you don't necessarily know why you got denied, right? Like, it's not like we give you a sheet of feedback. So you kind of have to guess on what was the glaring weakness or the weaknesses that we as reviewers pointed out. And so if it's not obvious to you, get opinions from other people to see what was missing and really introspect, because that's what we said, right? You can't address a weakness until you identify the weakness. And I think this is a key time when that matters. And like he said, I think it's all about growth. It's not that you have to somehow turn into the greatest applicant in the history of the world in a year, but it's like, how did you spend that year improving yourself and maintaining your commitment to medicine? Because it's very easy, right, to get demoralized and discouraged in that 1 year if you don't get in the first time. So how did you stay active with your passion to pursue medicine. So those are the things I'd add.
Amazing. Okay, so this question is actually for you, Aryaman. What was a key factor that you think helped you get the what was a key factor that you think helped you the most to get into Johns Hopkins? What were your stats?
Yeah, I'll just kind of keep this kind of quick. One, I think the factor that helped me get into Johns Hopkins is the same that for anybody to get into any school, right? It's just making sure you have the right narrative. And I think I think that's the narrative I did. I wanted to do engineering and medicine as a combination, and Johns Hopkins offered me a great ability to do that with its, amazing BME department. So I think my mission resonated with Johns Hopkins' mission. And I think that that's just a very apt statement you can say about anybody, right? In any school. You figure out what your mission is, you figure out what that school's mission is, and if they align, you'll likely get in. So I think that's what worked for me. It does not work. I'm not saying that everybody is going to be the right fit for Johns Hopkins, right? And Johns Hopkins is not the right fit for everybody. So pick the right school more than just kind of the name. Figure out the one that's right for you, where you're going to be comfortable and happy and able to reach your full potential. As far as my stats, I don't think I'm really comfortable sharing that too much, kind of publicly. I think that they met or were in line with the median scores that are at Johns Hopkins. And I think, again, that comes down to school selection and strategy, figuring out the places that you're going to meet those kind of quote unquote thresholds so that you can get past that first step and get your application reviewed. So that's all I'd say kind of about that. I think everybody has a shot at where they want to go, and just make sure it's the right place for you.
Katie, so you're nodding your head. What was your narrative about?
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I'll just say I was nodding most about, I don't think the stats really matter. I mean, they matter for the minimum threshold that we talked about, but they really don't matter in terms of like, that's why I can't speak for Aryaman, but that's, I'm sure, not the reason that he got in there. They just helped, get him past this threshold. The narrative that he and the time he invested is really the important part. My narrative was that my family is my family and my husband's family and our kind of associated like extended families are from both native, like indigenous native and Hispanic backgrounds. And that was a very hugely underserved population, even in Southern California, where they make up more, sometimes a majority of the population in certain areas. It was something I was very passionate about advocating for and pursuing avenues in which I could continue to improve access for those populations. And so I worked as a scribe in an underserved Spanish-speaking no insurance clinic in the area that I lived at the time, and I volunteered in every club and avenue that I could. In medical school, I was part of the Latino Medical Student Association, and so like I've continued to do that. I'm in residency now. I've developed a kind of a cooperation or coordination where we are going to New Mexico to provide basic plastic surgery and reconstructive access to Native indigenous tribes in the Navajo area. So like this is something that I'm very passionate about, and I sought out opportunities to like further advance my knowledge base, but also my advocacy for this group. And so that was kind of my narrative. Everything I did was in a way was to improve the physician that I could ultimately become, to do these things for these patients that I'm, and not just these patients, all patients, but just that was something that I was passionate about and still am. And that was kind of my narrative for my application.
I hope that everybody listening like hones in on that answer,
Yes.
because if you're in an interview, like that is the type of answer that we want to hear from you, right? Like
I was just about to say.
Passion. You can just like hear the passion come out in the way that Katie's talking about kind of her life and experiences, right? And so if you've done this admissions process correctly, like, that is the way you should be able to talk about your passions.
It gave me chills, Katie. I don't think I've ever asked you that question. So we do a ton of these webinars.
Thank you so much. That's very
so beautiful. Okay, awesome. Let's get going to the next question. There's a really specific, Thomas, your question is very specific. So I think I will generalize it a little bit just so everyone can get some value out of this. And I think it's a really great question. How do people figure out what schools will give them a chance? Like, maybe you guys can speak to sort of the strategy that goes into school selection.
I think especially to your question, Thomas, when you have a weaker or a less than ideal, say, GPA or MCAT score, but hopefully a good trend, which is what it seems like here. You have a ton of clinical experience as well. This is what we talked about. There's going to be weaknesses in every application. My preference is to address them. So usually that comes out in the form of your personal statement or in a secondary application that asks about an obstacle or a resilience kind of experience in which you can directly address, hey, I didn't have great grades at the beginning of college, and here are some reasons, not excuses, reasons why, and things that I have done to actively correct that, resulting in a drastic improvement in my study schedule and habits, in my grades, and my overall learning style. I think in my opinion, if you can address them, you should. And then to answer your question a little bit more directly, how do you decide which schools? There are plenty of tools and apps that are created to kind of utilize your MCAT and GPA to give you some ranges of schools that would generally accept some, like the Lizzie M score, say, generally accept something in that range. And so it's important, especially when you have a less than ideal score. It's really important your school selection strategy is key. So someone that has, let's say, a less than ideal score, applying to all of these, what we would call reach schools, because they sound good or they're prestigious or, it's where their dad went, whatever it may be, is going to have a much less successful application cycle than someone who applies within the range that is appropriate for their objective measures. And so your school selection is critical. You can use any of these scores or apps to kind of help guide you as to which schools generally accept folks in the same GPA or MCAT range. What do you think, Aryaman?
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to answer. I think there is a game to be played, like you said. I wish everybody could go to Harvard. I would love that for all of you, but unfortunately, that's not reality. So pick the right schools, look at these resources that are out there. I think Inspira also has a tool to help you with this. So
yes, we do.
Yeah, and then Thomas, specifically about that, I think you're doing the right things, right? You've shown the growth, and so yes, the objective measures might not be the best, but talk about that growth in your personal statement, right? What are the challenges that you faced early on and how you overcame those to get those better grades and better scores? And we'd love hearing about that. So I think that's all I have to add.
And as reviewers, we understand that. It's not unreasonable that you came into undergrad and maybe your parents didn't go to school, I'm the first generation college grad in my family, and my first 2 semesters were not good, because I didn't know, I had no advice or guidance on how to do well in school. So we are all humans, like Aryaman said, at least for now. And we understand that you're not going to be this perfect student at all times, especially if you can explain it in a mature, introspective way. I'm all for that.
Awesome. So we have about 4 minutes left. There's a really great question in here. So this particular individual didn't really develop an interest in medicine until their junior year. They are now a senior and about to take their MCAT. They're very proud of what they built in the meantime, but they're wondering if that late start will impact their application. For example, clinical hours or shadowing.
Yeah, just going to quickly answer this, so hopefully we can get time to answer the last question. I'm really happy, for you and the way that you've built this trajectory. I think things that I would say is truly consider if a gap year is going to be the right decision for you in this, because it is better to take a gap year and bolster up your application than to apply with an underbaked application, not get in, and then have to reapply. So that's kind of the short story of this, but you want to make sure your application's up to par when you do decide to apply. Katie?
Yeah, I fully second that motion. The best chance we talk about this with skin grafts a lot. The best chance you're going to have to get a skin graft to live is the first time you do it. So the best chance that you're going to have to get into medical school is the first application you submit. It only gets harder after that because you have to prove yourself to a different level. So you want the first time you apply to be as strong as you can possibly make it. And I think in reading your question, I haven't seen your application. There could be plenty of hours, who knows, but in reading your application, you really need to make a mature decision here as to whether you need another year to optimize your application before you apply or not.
Amazing. So we have about 2 minutes left. Can we quickly touch on this question? Would you recommend retaking pre-med courses when you received a C+ during the COVID lockdown? Although you show an upward trend, receiving A's in later pre-med courses post-COVID?
I would. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly. It's actually, I think, the first time I've really had this question asked, at least to me. I think the thing I'll say is typically there's no value in retaking a course that you've already took, just because it's just kind of, at least to me, it raises a couple of questions. And a lot of times it's, if you've already shown that growth in improvement in grades through other courses you take, and I also don't know how that would report on AMCAS if you take the same course twice that is for a grade. Like, I think it's different if you withdraw or something, but I just think that could be a little confusing, especially if you can use that time to really bolster your application in different areas than just retaking the course. But Katie, sounds like you might know more about this.
Oh no, I totally agree. It can be a little confusing. If you have the capacity, I don't know, it depends. Like, is it one class you got to see in, or is it multiple? It kind of depends on a couple of factors. I think if you have the capacity and it's during a COVID and you can kind of explain it, then maybe it would look better if you could go back and retake it. And if you ace that class, you can be like, hey, I had a hard time adjusting during to the study schedule during COVID. I retook and was successful. I think it's not a horrible idea. It can get a little bit dicey in terms of reporting, like Aryaman said on that application, but it a little bit depends on your application and depends on if you can ace that course or not.
Amazing. So we are actually out of time and we're at the end of our questions. So thank you, Katie, Aryaman. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Thank you to our audience. We do these every week. We'd love to see you on next week's session. If you haven't already subscribed to our newsletter, please do. We post these weekly. As I said, we want to give you as much value as possible. And we're always talking about things that matter to you. So we're really excited for this. Thank you both for being here. Thank you, everyone watching this at home. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. And we'll see you next week.